Claudia, congratulations. I think this is, when I think about where we first started this journey with each other, and we are all human, and to now stand here today and talk about 50 companies and 12 organizations backing this Hispanic promise, we've come a long way. Thank you, Richard, for recognizing me. Yes, this is my third week at the Zeno Group after 20 years in Fortune 100 corporate America and a decade in the news business. And I appreciate your comment about recruiting from above, because it reminded me of a conversation. Here's a little tip. If you work with somebody and it's their last day in the office, it's the best day to ask them for advice. Because on the way out the door, they'll tell you just about anything, right? And I remember talking to a gentleman who ran HR at Ford Motor Company, very successful African-American corporate executive who went on to lead HR at Chevron. And he said, you need to know the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. Everybody know the difference? And, sadly, I wish I had learned that in my 20s, but he was telling me this in my 40s. And I tried to practice it in my 50s. And, it's really important, because I think, that's what this promise is about sponsoring all of us. The other thing, too, is I've had the good fortune of working with several, really well-known CEOs in corporate America. And one day it dawned on me, in addition to all of them being fine gentlemen, Anglo-Saxon gentlemen, white Caucasian gentlemen, they were all first-time CEOs. None of them had ever been a CEO before. And so it seemed to me that also underscored to me the role that sponsorship plays, and sometimes the leap of faith we all have to take in each other to say, yeah, you know what? I'm backing you. And in a similar way, thank you, Richard, for sponsoring me and taking a leap of faith on me. And I think the leap of faith we're asking corporate America to take on what is a rich, diverse America that we need to begin to embrace and really bring into the mainstream. So anyway, so some key takeaways overarching, and then we'll go to our panelists. I think we all agree on the need to unify. That is clear. That has been a core part of the We Are All Human mandate, and something Claudia has been driving dating back to the first summit at the United Nations in December. I think secondly, and it's evidenced in the voting and in the research that the Zeno Group has done in conjunction with We Are All Human, that there are really three priorities that we're rallying around: access to education, financial empowerment, and this yearning really to enhance our image today as a broader community. And then I think somebody said today from our entrepreneur panel, we always have to be developing business. It's not a 9-to-5 job, it's full time. And I would add to that, I think we have to constantly be telling our story. Our community story. We get, on the clock, off the clock, with each other, because even we can't afford to be ignorant about our own story, but also with the folks outside of our community. So those are probably some of the key takeaways I would take away. But Andres, you want to kick off your observations? You're going to focus on the topic of education.
Yes, and the first lesson of education was, are we Hispanic or are we Latino? And I think the comment was, we're Hispanic 9 to 5, but at 5 p.m. we become Latino. So keep that in mind. But the panel did talk about the journey of education and the process between high school, college, and then the corporate life. And we must also remember, a lot of minds and ideas are formed even before then in middle school. We do know that through particularly women's programs in technology. Hitting those kids at the middle school level really makes an impact in that process. So let's keep that in mind. A couple of key things that we learned from that process was those high schools are pushing kids in two different directions now within our community: college and vocational schools. And not always the traditional four-year schools, but the 2-year or sometimes the 4-year community colleges. And they're getting creative about handling our community, from fellowships, internships, apprenticeships, and using wraparound programs, and really working hard to remove that stigma from those community colleges. I myself just joined a community college board this past week to really help get that Hispanic voice in there. I highly recommend you do that as well. A key thing that they're doing, a lot of corporations are getting involved is in the mentorships, and is also getting involved in the Hispanic incubators. There's a spectacular one here, obviously here in Chicago, of 1871. I'm from Detroit, and we're very envious of what a great program that is, and that's something that keep getting engaged. And the key thing with corporate engagement is very focused on these public-private partnerships. A lot of the reality is we want to be involved because we want dibs on those students. We do have a workforce shortage, so we do want to get involved. We want to expose that brand and get that brand experience. One of the things that was also said was about making sure you give kids exposure, the ability to explore, and make sure it's the platform you're giving them so the kids can get educated. And that ecosystem as a whole needs to work together. And in finishing, one of the panelists talked about, music and athletics was the way to get out of the neighborhood, the whole rock and jock syndrome. But now, through technology, each of these kids now has an opportunity to be an entrepreneur. So let's encouraging them, and let's make sure we're educating them.
Paula? You got it.
Sorry, I hate to speak in public.
Well,
I'm a behind-the-scenes person.
And I mean, Paul, you're going to talk about perception change, the image issue, right?
Imagine that. Well, thank you, and thank you, Claudia. This has been an amazing event. I'm so grateful to be here. I think the biggest thing the biggest theme for the panel on changing perceptions, it's gatekeepers. And it's, from the media, we had someone who works in advertising to corporate to nonprofits. It's really about having internal advocates who will set up the stage from which Latinos can stand and be proud through inclusiveness and tell their story. And eventually, as someone on the panel alluded to, we will stop being a token Latino, and we will start becoming a part of the fabric. So I come from advertising myself, and it's always the ad of, well, let's get someone that looks Pan-Asian, Well, what if we stop thinking that way? Also coaching for leaders, and someone talked about, and it was Renato Fernandez, talked about, advertising, it's a white man's game. I would disagree a little bit with that because there are some great multicultural agencies out there, Latino-led multicultural agencies, but I get what he's saying. What he's saying is really bring a voice of diversity to the C-suite, especially because you have a lot of companies that have been bought out by bigger. So you have WPP who bought out Bravo Group and all that. So they're still being led by very Anglo leadership. And I would just add to that also on the client side, oftentimes you have clients, you have agencies who are talking to clients and trying to bring diversity to the table, but the clients are pushing back. So that is a challenge. Also talking about the media. Those who work at the media, in media outlets, play a very, very critical role, not just Latino media, but also general market media. And, the panel touched on this new world that we live in because it's not just traditional media anymore. It's not television, radio. We now live in a world where each one of us is a media source. We all can generate content that sometimes when it goes viral, it takes on a whole life of its own. You have influencers who have more power than a Super Bowl ad. So these gatekeepers are really giving the platform for Latinas who are helping in their community, or the small business owner in El Monte, California. Everyday people who are out there making a difference in their communities, but really don't have a voice. So the media is really bringing those stories to light. And to summarize, I would just say that every single one of the 54 million Latinos in this country play a role as influencers and storytellers. Also, in dispelling the negative perceptions that exist about Latinos. and why. So thank goodness for Google, right? We love it. If Latino GDP was a country, by the way, Latino GDP is 2.13 trillion. If it was a country, it would be the 7th largest country in the world. So we have the numbers
We certainly do.
to get the respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And Rodrigo, you're going to give us the key takeaways on financial empowerment from today.
Yes, I will, and I'm going to be very brief. Very simple, 3 items. First, we have to build mobility, and that can be done. Education, employment, entrepreneurship can provide pathways to financial and economic capital. Number 2, building equity and wealth. That means access to capital. Well, how do we do that? That is A, home ownership through business loans and venture capital. As we've noted earlier, only 1% goes to Latino founders. Through home ownership rates, obviously through home loans. Degree and vocational education, that's done through student loans. And then obviously through financial literacy and understanding the complexities of 401ks and IRAs, college savings plans and ABLE investment plans and credit cards and insurance and taxes and loans. And number 3 is through building representation. We have approximately 18% of the U.S. population, but yet when we're looking at corporate board diversity, only 1.8% of the Russell 3000 directors are Latinos. And it gets even worse if you're talking about Latinas. It's less than 0.5%. Or we're talking about the C-suite. Only 10 to 12 CEOs in the Fortune 500 are Latinos. That's 2% approximately. Or when we're talking about STEM, which is the future of this country, 8 to 9% of the professional STEM workforce is Latino. So how do we do this? We need to create the opportunities, or how some say, you have to be in the room when it happens. We need to influence the decision makers and those with capital, and we need to change the perception and the Latino narrative. Thank you.